he was soon pursuing an Irish purpose there. Simultaneously, he was president of an Irish National Land League, founded with a central committee of former Fenians, former Republicans believing in violence, to reduce rents, prevent evictions, and ultimately transfer land ownership from landlord to the tenant. And Parnell, running an open land league whose operators in the countryside quite often used illegal and violent methods, was heading into a political storm. Without official land league approval, landlords were being assassinated. Of course, officially, the Land League was a respectable body and didn't approve of violence. Violence was repeatedly deprecated by the Land League's president, Parnell, and by other members of the parliamentary party who were active in it. Sometimes, though, this disapproval was on a rather ambiguous note. Joseph Biggar, for instance, who was a one-time member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood and now member of Parliament for County Cavan, said categorically that the shooting of landlords was wrong. It was wrong, he said, because the assailant frequently missed the landlord and hit somebody else. Now, Parnell knew perfectly well that many of the top officials of the Land League were former Fenians. He'd had his own contacts with the Irish Republican Brotherhood and had actually been asked to join, but had refused. What precisely, though, they were up to in the Land League, he was always careful not to know. In other words, he allowed the campaign to benefit from crude methods from which he was always able scrupulously to dissociate himself. It was a dangerous game, but the sort which every skilled politician needs to be able to master. In any case, Parnell was just about to add his own dimension of bitterness to the land. In a speech at Ennis in September 1880, he asked his audience what was to be done with a man who took a farm from which another had been evicted.
Now, I think I heard somebody say, shoot him. But I wish to point out to you a very much better way, a more Christian and more charitable way. When a man takes a farm from which another has been evicted, you must show him what you think of him on the roadside when you meet him and in the streets of the town. You must show him at the shop counter. You must show him at the fair and in the marketplace and even in the house of worship by leaving him severely alone, by putting him into a sort of moral Coventry, by isolating him from the rest of his kind as if he were a leper of old.
One man in particular, a land agent, was to feel the full force of this treatment suggested by Parnell. Under police protection, he had to try and bring in his own harvest with help only from his family, because no one else would work for him. His name gave a new word to the English language: boycott. A vast force of police and military escorted volunteer Orangemen from the north to come and help him. The queerest menagerie that ever came into Connaught, as somebody put it. With the help of these volunteers from the north, Captain Boycott's harvest was eventually successfully brought in. But grateful to the Orangemen as he was for their services, he was in the end forced to leave the country. Meanwhile, violence against those who broke the Land League's decrees continued. The boycott was applied to the police, and those who took land from which another had been evicted were, as Parnell had proposed, duly shunned, ostracized, and treated as a leper of old. Acts of violence by men with blackened faces raiding the houses of those who didn't toe the Land League line multiplied. The police were increasingly required to deal with those who, with Land League support, violently resisted eviction. Gladstone, the Prime Minister, while obtaining from Parliament special powers to enforce the law, also got through Parliament a new Land Act. This made great concessions to the tenant farmer, setting up special land courts to decide a fair rent, whose decision a landlord had to accept. This Land Act also conferred eviction for the tenant farmer, provided he paid that legally established rent. Now, this was a revolutionary measure by the standards of 19th century views on property, but it didn't please the extremists in the Land League, who wanted to expropriate the landlords altogether. And Parnell, though he appreciated the benefits of the new Land Act, couldn't afford to antagonize extremists, particularly those who supported the Land League with money from America. With the violence continuing, Parnell continued to denounce Gladstone. And when, in September 1881, Gladstone addressed a meeting at Leeds, his patience broke its bounds as he had to face the fact that for all his land concessions, there were parts of Ireland in which the Queen's writ still did not run.
If there is still to be fought in Ireland a final conflict between law on one side and sheer lawlessness on the other, then I say, gentlemen, without hesitation, the resources of civilization are not yet exhausted.
Parnell replied at once.
It is a good sign that this masquerading knight-errant, this pretending champion of the rights of every other nation except those of the Irish nation, should be obliged to throw off the mask today and stand revealed as the man who, by his own utterances, is prepared to carry fire and sword into your homesteads, unless you humbly abase yourselves before him and before the landlords of the country.
Gladstone put the resources of civilization into action. It was the tyrant Gladstone, and he said unto himself, I never will be easy till Parnell is on the shelf. So make the warrant out in haste, and take it by the mail, and we'll clap the pride of Erin's Isle into cold Kilmainham jail. A contemporary Dublin street ballad of 1881. Early in the morning of the 13th of October 1881, in a room of Morrison's Hotel in Dublin, where he'd spent the night after coming down from Avondale, Parnell was arrested by a detective who served the warrant on him. Beside this wrong, all other wrongs of Ireland do grow pale, for they've clapped the pride of Erin's Isle into cold Kilmainham jail. Parnell was lodged, not all that uncomfortably as it turned out, here in Kilmainham. It was a pretty cold, dank place, the best of times, still is, but he was given the best cell, that one up there with 2 windows, about 21 feet by 18. It had a fireplace, and he was allowed curtains and furniture and books, and he was let out of it for 6 hours a day for recreation, that is, exercise and free association. He and the other Land League men who were arrested with him didn't have to wear prison clothes, but had newspapers and numerous visitors. These visitors brought him news he wasn't sorry to hear, that a Land League attempt to get farmers to pay no rent at all in opposition to the new Land Act was proving a failure. Politically, being sent to prison at this time was the best possible thing that could have happened to him. He was able to seem a martyr to the cause. At the same time, he was absolved from all responsibility for the continuing violence on the land, which he wanted to end anyway.